Wendy with us. Wendy Frazier mentors the collective wisdom in organizations by engaging the talents and hearts of people. She fosters and builds capacity by strengthening relationships and systems so groups and organizations can thrive. She brings fresh approaches with a flair of humor and gets results. Wendy works with clients in the US and abroad. She is the author of the book Trust Repair. It is possible, and is a speaker, consultant, mentor, volunteer, and international humanitarian. Wendy has over 30 years in the continuous improvement and organization development field. She has worked both inside government as an employee and externally as a consultant and teacher in higher education. Without further ado, I am so excited to pass the mic to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Natalia. I really appreciate your warm greeting and welcome. And Kelly, thank you for your ASL support today. And hello, everybody. Thanks for spending some time this afternoon. My hope in our hour or so is to share with you some things that have been reoccurring over the last year or two as I have worked with clients, in particular, helping them to repair trust and strengthen relationships. And I thought that I wanted to just make some sense out of that, learn a little bit more about that. And as I was contemplating all of that, it came out to three mindsets. A couple of them have some tools, and it's not going to be a surprise to you. So this isn't earth-shattering, but my hope is that this is a nice reminder of the things that we can do collectively to really strengthen how we work with each other and how we get along. So here's what that's going to look like. The first mindset is, am I truly, wholeheartedly, and open-mindedly listening? It's so important, right? This next one is, how am I choosing to use myself in this moment? And the third piece I'll go over is, am I seeking the third truth? And I'll talk a little bit more about what all of those things mean. But I'm really convinced that if we get better at these three things, you're going to see a world of difference in our meetings together and how we work on our tasks with other people and projects. It could be better in our families and neighborhoods and things like that. So the first mindset is peace on listening. I was thinking a little bit about how important it is, and some of the work that I've been doing with people is just to get people to slow down. When I listen, my brain is working so fast that um, I'm picking out pieces, and I'm thinking of responding, and I'm thinking of, grocery lists, and I'm thinking of, other, projects that have to get done. I am not always present. And I bet you know just as much as I do is that when I really am in a space that I want someone to hear me, to truly listen to me, I think you can tell when they're not. And we're all guilty of this. I mean, there really is a lot of complexity that we're managing, but it makes a huge difference in how we do that. So there's two things when it comes to listening. Well, there's more things, but one from an organizational perspective and at work. There's this old quote that I remember hearing in my early continuous improvement days. And it was something like, why is there never enough time to do something right, but there's always time to do it over? And that quote kind of bothered me, right? I thought a little bit about, what is it about that we're maybe in a rush to get something done? And when we do that, are we shortchanging how we listen to one another? Probably so. But if we don't get all the information that I need, if I haven't truly been maybe listening and present at that meeting, then it's going to show up in how we get our work done. Again, I know this isn't earth science or rocket science, and I know it's nothing new for you, but how are we being conscious and intentional about slowing down? The other thing that when it comes to listening is really about the relationships. So I have been doing a lot of mediation this year for clients. Um, as I try to work at the group level or organizational level, sometimes there are relationships at the interpersonal level that need some support. And I have been doing probably 4 or 5 times the amount of what I've normally been doing in the past with groups because there are things that at the interpersonal level, people need some additional time to pause and to reflect on maybe some experiences that they had together, and that if they didn't get a chance to resolve it, it's continuing to impact the relationship and, of course, the group. And what I'm finding in these moments, it's truly about pausing the people enough. Are they listening to one another? So I got looking around, and this is a particular model that I have shared with clients over the last couple of years, and it's not anything new. It's from Otto Scharmer, and he has studied and put together this particular model on 4 levels of listening. And I invited people to think about this and reflect on this. And in fact, this is the one handout that you can find from the Results Washington page, and you can download that, or perhaps someone from the team might put it into chat. And either way, it's there. But let me just describe this image, and let me describe some of the information that we can kind of glean from this model. So we have these 4 levels of listening. The first level of listening, what we do is we listen from habit. This happens to be that people are listening to just kind of confirm what I already know. Okay, so I'm listening to a podcast, or I'm listening to the news, or I'm at a meeting listening about a project update. And what I might be only tuning into, if I'm only at level 1 listening, is just confirming what I already know, right? So we're listening from a place of judgment, because I'm trying to just listen for, like I said, to confirm what I have. We do this naturally. And if you think about it, it's also aligns with adult learning theory. As I listen to something, I start to wonder, have I had an experience around that before? How is that fitting into my, you know, my knowledge base already? Great. The problem is if we stay at level 1 listening, if we're only downloading, then people come in and they're just maybe kind of sharing what, information, and people are only pulling out some things just to confirm what they already know, but we're not deepening the learning together. We're not deepening our ability to interact, and of course, problem solve and all of that. The second level of listening is what he calls factual listening. I'm looking at it from a place of trying to um, what is different? So I'm listening enough, not just to confirm what I already know, which is level 1 listening, but level 2 is saying, okay, I'm going to listen to what I'm hearing or reading, and then I'm noticing what differences there are. And when I do this, I'm more curious. I have a more open mind. Um, and it's important to be able to get to that place that I'm not listening from habit, that I'm actually starting to listen to, okay, here's what I know, here's what's different. Okay, that's good. That's useful information. I can learn about gaps, and we need this. We need this in our ability to connect with each other. The third level of listening is empathetic listening, or empathic listening. And I'm listening from a place where I have I have heard the facts, but now I want to observe and experience as much as I can. What is it like to be perhaps in your position? What is it like to work with those customers? How does that problem affect you, right? So I'm not looking at it from my lens. I'm trying to look at it from your lens. And as we do that, I'm deepening our connection as human beings, but I'm also doing this in a way that's opening up, more compassion, because I recognize that your experience is different than mine. And it's not just at the information level, it's at the heart level, it's at the emotive level. And there's a couple of things that you can do in particular around empathetic listening. You can pause people enough. And we do this also in continuous improvement. We want to understand what it's like maybe for the customer, give us that experience. Here, if I'm at a staff meeting and I'm trying to maybe argue my point, that's downloading, right? But if I step back and I'm saying, well, tell me more about what it's like from your perspective. How does this problem affect your team or the work that you're doing? When we do that, we're moving into that level 3 listening. Uh, and I'm going to pause here for a little bit longer, because it's an important place to try to get our groups to. And I've spent time with my consulting with some clients this year trying to make this in particular a stronger skill set. So I've done things like fish bowls where I've got an affected group of people that want to describe what the work is like for them, what the problems are that they face. What is it that they want others to understand? And the cool thing about a fishbowl is you have those people on the inside and on the outside where people are witnessing that and they're listening to that. And they don't get to argue that. And they don't get to ask them a bunch of questions yet. They're just listening to that. And then they share back what they heard. And it's a very cool experience. And then we give everybody a chance to have their time in the middle. I have done some work where I'm actually physically standing on one side and the other person was right in front of me. And I demonstrated moving to the other side where I'm standing with them. I said, tell me about your perspective. Help us understand what this is like. This emotive piece, this empathetic listening, was pretty powerful for that group to actually practice that. And then we broke ourselves up into smaller groups, and people had some wonderful conversations to really try to convey what their experience is. The final level of listening is generative listening, and this is a pretty cool experience to get to. It's there's this building of of understanding the we're open and we're curious and I'm open to possibilities and things are emergent. I've only had a couple of experiences where I've kind of been at the level 4 listening, but it's pretty special. It's when you kind of let go of things. You know, have you ever been in a place where you forget time and you were all working on the problem and you're listening and you're building on each other and you're creating something that you didn't even know was possible in that moment? It's a pretty special way to get there. So these are the things that I share with people as I'm trying to help them strengthen their ability to listen. So just a quick reminder about how to get there. Um, if we want to strengthen our listening, moving from level 1 to level 2, um, we want to shift our attention from our own inside commentary to not anticipate what the other person is going to say so that I can think of my response, right? That keeps me in downloading. Instead, move back, invite curiosity, and invite what might be new, right? Let go of what you think they might do and say. Next, if I want to move from that point into more empathetic listening, right, is open up my ask some questions. What what is it, tell me about it from your perspective. Help me step into your space. And this is where we do in Lean Six Sigma, right? You do Gemba walks where the work is happening. Let me learn about what that's like for you. It's pretty powerful. And then finally, moving into generative listening, um, create some space. Don't overcrowd an agenda, and let people kind of create the learning together and listening together. Don't keep that so structured because that unstructured time can really create something new. All right, so you have that handout. Um, I wanted to just share this. Maybe you could bookmark it. This is an amazing TED Talk. And this particular person, it's like an 11-minute TED Talk. And even though the title is 10 Ways to Have a Better Conversation, a lot of it is around listening. And so Celeste Headley has things, where she gives you some specific pointers on, don't multitask. So you can tell if I'm listening, but if I'm looking at my phone, right, and you don't feel like I'm really listening to you, right? So she has some points around multitasking and don't go with the flow, ask open-ended questions. I mean, it's a wonderful TED Talk, so I encourage you to go ahead and watch it. But I would offer this. Next time you are in a space where you're feeling like you really want someone to hear you, then use that moment for the first 2 to 3 minutes and ask the other person open-ended questions. And I know that might feel wrong because you're the one that wants to be heard and conveyed. But if you show that you're listening to the other person, it's really going to make a difference. Because when they're done, once you've asked them a couple of open-ended questions, and by doing that, you're trying from level 1 to level 2 listening, right? You can comment on something, which might move you into level 3 listening, and you can stay there. And then at some point it's your turn, right? Um, so it's just something I have invited people to think about. So let's pause for a moment. I wanted to give you a 1 minute, what I'm calling coffee break, and just invite you to think about when do you notice the quality of your listening change? When does it change, right? I know for me, it happens when I actually feel like someone is um, authentic and they ask me a question, right? It shifts my the way I'm listening back to that person. Um, so, what might be true for you? When do you notice the quality of your listening changing? So, I'll give you 1 minute to jot a note down. Okay. Thanks, everyone, for that pause. So, mindset number one is, am I truly wholeheartedly listening? Um, Mindset number two, how am I choosing to use myself in this moment? It really does shape how people get along. The images here, the first one, the ostrich, sometimes there are people who might think that, well, it's your problem, right? I don't have to deal with it. So they may not have to listen or see. Um, there are some people that choose to deliberately not tune into what you might be saying and what you might be needing. Um, there are those that might confront, and here it's kind of a playful little image, but others might choose to use themselves in that moment to be competitive and to get their point across, or to really engage in that conflict. And conflict isn't bad, right? It's all about how we manage it. But how are you using yourself in that moment? Are you seeing that it's a I must win at the expense of what? And then there are others that might look at using to choose themselves in these moments that are affecting people and human dynamics. In a way, what can I learn? What can I learn? Is there something that I can do to grow? What does the group need to grow, right? So we make different choices. And the whole idea is, can I be more aware and more conscious about how I bring myself to um, well, to moments that are, either distracting or um, frustrating, right? It's in those moments that really shape people's ability to get along. So you might be familiar with the fight or flight um, concept that as human beings we experience. Um, our brains are equipped like this, right? It keeps us alive. It keeps us safe. When we experience something that is, like an emotional spike, okay, that could be, in any number of things. It could be at a staff meeting when somebody says something that felt undermining to you. And you're like, oh, what? Or it could be a very difficult confrontation you know, with a coworker, or it could be, with a customer, any number of things. But you have that moment. And when we have these emotional spikes, it hijacks that amygdala. Um, when that happens, right? When we have these emotional spikes, I don't have full access to what's happening in my brain. So our brain goes into a space like, I want to protect you, right? So what are you going to do? So we react in that moment. Typically, when we react, it's not a very good thing if we're stuck in reaction mode. Again, I'm not telling you anything that you probably don't already know, but there are things that when these peaks experiences happen, and this is the part that I think has been interesting over the last couple of years that I keep trying to remind people about, is we get these flashbulb moments. There was this study that was done from people who experienced 9/11 from ground zero in New York City. And they asked a series of questions of the same batch of people right when it happened. I think they did the 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, and 10 year marks. And they asked the same questions. And they found out that the details changed over time with what people remembered. So, what is that about, right? When we have these moments when we're kind of hijacked, um, my brain is only taking in certain pieces. Um, because I'm only taking in certain pieces, right? I need to be able to take care of myself so that then I can come back and react to or respond better. Um, and it's when people don't get a chance to stop and reflect and think about things that we start to make assumptions about the bits of pieces that I remember, right? The details that I picked out. And people don't have the whole story. So there's brain chemistry going on here. And I just want to normalize that. But as we normalize this is a really important piece about what shapes people's ability to get along. Can I, when I have these emotional spikes, which we all do, can I take care of myself in that moment and ask for time or do something else so that I can move into a place that I can choose a response? So if I let time pass, right? Maybe you just say, hey, I want to talk about this at another staff meeting, or maybe we could take this offline and have a conversation later this afternoon or tomorrow. As you give yourself that time, then those chemicals will kind of dissipate in our brains. And it opens up then my full ability to use both sides of my brain and be able to connect with people. When I do that, I can be reflective. I can do my own little interviews and be curious, like what contributed to that? Why did that bug me so much? I mean, I love to interview the feelings. Whenever I feel emotionally hijacked, in your body, you feel it, and you just want to stop and say, what's going on? Have I felt that way before? So I interview those feelings so I can make more sense about it next time because I definitely want to choose a response. Um, there's this colleague of mine, Dr. Daria Funches, and I've listened to her many times. And this is one particular quote that she was sharing in a webinar that I found was pretty profound and has deeply affected how people work. Um, when wounds or ego or fear get involved, they interfere with our accurate perception. And I'll give you just a personal example. You know, for many years, as we first moved into the neighborhood where I live, they would have gatherings, and I loved it. It was just a nice spirit of community, and I had fun. But I found as I was going to those that people were more interested in talking to my partner, my husband, because he has an interesting job, and I found to myself I was going then to these meetings or to these events going, well, almost getting ready to feel unheard, unseen. um, I was putting it on myself because my ego, and I felt wounded the first couple of times that I was trying to share a little bit about what I did. And people then changed it and they wanted to know what John did. And I then found myself going to those meetings or going to those events with that kind of wound open, kind of waiting for somebody to, not ask me something. And I thought, why am I doing that? Right. So it interfered with the perception of how I saw myself with these neighbors. So I decided, because I'm like, that's wasted energy. At some point, I had to kick myself, right? And I just said, okay, I have a choice here, right? I can go and I can talk to people about the work that I do, or you know what? I can go talk to somebody else about the work that they do or things that they have an interest in. When I stopped letting some of that past get in the way, it made a difference. Um, this happens as I have listened to people again. This is all, I'm trying to frame things in the last couple of years, what's really rising to the surface about groups. Uh, Groups at the group level also have wounds and they have ego because they see themselves in a certain way and fear and concerns, and these are very real things. And if they can also help make sense of it and not live in those spaces, but live more in the space of possibility, it can help make a difference. So here's a tool. Um, some of you might have recognized this from shared this several years back. But it's a tool that I use all the time from my mentor, EDC Shore, and it's about choices. Um, and so again, this second mindset is about how am I choosing to use myself in this moment? So in this first column, these are the choices that we make, right? In the second column, those are choices that I believe that others are making me or that I have to, or sometimes I feel like I don't have a choice, right? And the upper level is I'm aware of these choices. And the lower level is I'm unaware that we're just on, just subconsciously doing things without thinking about it. So when I'm aware of things, and I feel like I'm making that choice, I'm accountable. Those are things like, the jobs that you do. There are going to be parts of your job that you love and that bring you energy, that you enjoy. And there will be some things in our jobs that are like, oh, I got to do that report again. And it's kind of draining, not interested, but you do it anyway because you're accountable to that. You're making those choices. Not everything in that box is things that we always like to do. Like for me, I hate cooking. I don't cook very well. And, every time my family got hungry, I'm like, oh, I gotta feed them again. So, you know, we worked it out, but I was accountable to that. I did it. In the next box, when we make choices that we attribute to others, I can blame, right? And there are times when I see this in groups that it's like, well, management made the decision, dot, 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 right? Or, people who are in charge of, maybe uh, state legislature or city leaders and whatever the governing body may be in your group. Sometimes we can blame saying they passed this law, they passed a city ordinance, and now we have to do this. When you hear the language we have to, we typically are in this box, and it's an energy draining box. um, Groups that people, if you can see yourself, if we're in all these boxes all the time, but it's how much time do you spend in them. So that's where that place, the energy draining, I can blame. You might be interested, like, why is the word praise there? Well, the praise is there because sometimes we give away our energy by overpraising somebody else, or giving, maybe I worked on something, but I kept saying, well, I wouldn't have done it had Kelly not done her work, or had Jeannie not done her part. And it's like, well, great, that's good. And you did your part too. So sometimes people kind of give away their energy in in that space. When we're unaware, we're on automatic. This is something that shows up also in groups, then and individually, of course. It's our worldview about how things should work. Like if you are going to be a guest in someone's home, there are rules that are kind of built into your head based on how you grew up and maybe how you operate. And those are some of your automatics. We have automatics about how we believe just good decision-making practices should be. And we have automatics around what it means to do good stakeholder work. We have automatics around what it means to be a good team member, right? Do we share airtime? There's some people like, well, that person's talking a lot. Well, why is that? Well, it's kind of bucking up against our automatic. And finally, there's a socialization that happens also where these are choices that were made largely attributed to others, and it's a larger scale. It's not just a place. This is where culture is shaped, um, and it's things like it's belief systems such as, do you believe that only engineers, for an example, can be leaders of other engineers? Or nurses can only be leaders of other nurses, right? So that's just one example of sometimes we get socialized and kind of stuck in that space, thinking about what that means. Here's why this tool could be useful is I hear my mentor, Edie Seashore, what she would say to me is when I felt most stuck, she would say, can you think of another choice? Right? What are your choices? And then as I would be talking, she would hear something. She goes, that sounds like an automatic. What's that about? Right? So part of what we can do with and for each other and how we can use this particular tool is we think about how am I using myself in this moment? If something is happening in my group, do I sit back and wait for it to fail? Well, then I am sitting there in that choice, like, well, I feel like I don't have a choice. I can't do anything, but I'm just going to sit back. That's not helpful, right? I can make a different choice. And how do I voice it? Right? Maybe there's a way that I can get one or two other colleagues on the team and say, hey, let's put something together and let's present back to the boss or back to the team. So we could use this as thinking about where am I at? What do I need in this moment? Do I choose to kind of step into the mess if it feels like it's messy and I'm going to help clean it up? Do I choose to, address an issue that, the group seems to be doing the ostrich approach, So it's really important about how people choose to do this. I've had some people who choose to just want to be right and at the expense of others. And like, and I said, and what's the impact of that? So these choices matter about how you bring yourself to things. All right, another quick 1 minute coffee break. So I want you to think maybe about an experience that you've had lately, uh, that maybe wasn't going as well as you wanted. Think a little bit about what are some of your choices in that? What are your intentions? How do you want to show up? Do you want to show up as someone who is a helper or someone who only tells everybody what the problems are, but not offers the help? I mean, there's so many ways that we can show up. So maybe just take a minute and think about that. 1 minute. It's a minute-ish. I don't know, stopwatch with me. It's close. Okay. The last mindset is, am I seeking the third truth? I heard this quote from Gandhi. He says that you bring your truth and I bring my truth. And together we're creating the third truth. I have loved that particular quote, and it has invited me over and over again to think about that I am pulling out my perspective, my experience, the data that I'm pulling out, um, the things I'm paying attention to, all of that. And so was the other person. Um, and I have to say that in the last couple of years also with the trust repair efforts with some groups is that there's some people in these moments that just say, I just know, that this was the truth, right? And they use the word truth, quite honestly. And so does the other person. And it's like, and there's almost this disconnect between, well, this is the truth. And so you're not being honest. And when we start to paint that you're not being honest because this is the truth, without the possibility that the truth could be more than just that, it really hampers that moment. It hampers people's ability to truly hear each other because then it's on defensive and it's like, well, don't call me dishonest. And I have to say that even though Gandhi's piece is on the third truth, I think there's like, I don't know, maybe 23 truths or more. There, you are pulling out a slice of information and data, and you're adding meaning to it, and that's your experience, your lived experience, and even our perceptions in that too. But other people have the same, and we have to create the space to listen to that. um, I'll offer this before kind of going on to the next one too. My going through my doctoral program, I think what I learned the most in spending those years in school and studying, and I just learned that there's so much we don't know. And I struggle with people that act like they're know-it-alls because I look at that going, there's just still so much we don't know. So why do we make, why do we sound like we just, this is it, this is what I know? We just have to me, that needs to be more permeable. We need to be able to expand our thinking and just recognize that there's more truths than just mine. Okay, so one of the things that helps us look at data and truth is this thing that I'm calling sound and current data. Um, and what that is you think a little bit about information, right? Data. And is it sound? What I might consider sound data might be different than the person who's just working right next to me. I mean, there's some people that really go, gosh, we were only able to sample this much, but there's this many people. So is that sound? What is enough data to be sound? For some people, it's one data point. It's like, we have a customer that's calling and they need some support, and that's just enough to activate our resources and do something about it. But sometimes one customer not being happy maybe with the policy change, but all the others, it seemed, not all here, but many of the others, it was fine. Then maybe that one data point isn't enough. Maybe we just need to collect more to see if they need, but to see if we need to do something about it, right? So it's a good conversation. What is sound data? The second one is current. We operate on old data. Now, not just our performance measures. I'm talking at the human level, the human system level, that what gets in our way is sometimes we operate on data that's not so current, that I had one experience with that person in that other unit 2 years ago, and they acted like this. So we continue to project that that's the way they're going to act always. And it's like, that's not really fair, right? So when I start to work with groups to help them, I really want to listen to what are they operating on more current data, sound and current data. So here are the things that get in the way of gathering sound and current data. As human beings, we have a tendency to hold on as past experience as sound and current, right? And this is where expertise can be both a gift and a deterrent. Our the more the stronger we get, the more expertise we get, and we have all of this experience that sometimes we believe like, well, that's what's going to happen, moving forward, and that's not always true. We have to be open to something new. In fact, there's this awesome article that was written. It's called "Teaching Smart People How to Learn," and it has something to do with that very first bullet. So it's very cool. Teaching smart people how to learn. It's a Harvard Business Review article. I think it's like 20 plus years old, but it's still pretty cool, pretty spot on. Second, another thing that deters us gathering sound and current data is we believe we've already figured it out based on the information that we already have. That's not always useful because we need to invite and ask ourselves, do we have everything that we need? What else don't we know? Um, we treat our perception as reality, and we filter and create our own stories, and then we treat those as facts. And this again, we're talking about how am I creating the third truth? So my perception and the data that I've pulled out has created Wendy's opinion and Wendy's perception. But what about other people who are at the same meeting? In fact, I'm going to pause right here for a second. I was facilitating this group, and I think that there were 6 or 7 managers in the room, and I got this sense that I'm like, I don't, even though they think that they know what they're supposed to do next, I don't think that's what's happening. So I asked them all to stop and write down what they thought the objective was or what the intention of their next steps or even what the next step was. So it was something like that. And I had them write it down first. And then I said, I wanted everybody to read it. And all seven were so different that we ended up having a 2-hour conversation after that to say what contributed to us thinking we were done with the subject and moving on, um, and being so wildly different with what we thought our next steps were supposed to be. And a lot of that was how they were filtering what they were hearing and deciding, through their own, without asking anybody. So they just kind of had it all in their head. So it turned out to be an amazing conversation. We interpret nonverbals and behaviors without checking in. Uh, we do this all the time. I do it. I get myself into trouble. Um, we assume others' intentions based on the impact their behavior has on us. My trust stuff, a lot of it has to do with this. People are impacting each other, and sometimes we don't recognize when we're doing that. And are we stopping and letting them know, checking in before we go, oh, what you just undermined me at that meeting, and you must have wanted to do this without actually asking them, what did you mean by bringing up this at the meeting? Okay, great. That's good to know because do you know what the way it came out, what the impact was on me, right? You can generate learning and help people and get better at it, but what deters sound and current data is assumptions. It's just living in that. And then finally, what deters us sometimes is our own thinking around what we believe we should know. So sometimes we don't stop and ask, right? And this is ego. We all have ego, our self-image of the kind of person you are. So these things are important to keep in mind. One other TED Talk to keep, if you could watch it. This also is when we talk about creating the third truth. Catherine Schultz here has spent time helping people think about what it means to be wrong. And we got to make that more, what's the word? Palatable, okay to be wrong. So here were two quotes that I loved from her TED Talk. One, trusting too much. Oops, sorry. There we go. When we stop entertaining the possibility that we could be wrong, we end up doing dumb things, right? Here she gave huge examples like torpedoing the global economy, but we do this with each other. And I think this is a thread between all three of these mindsets. Are we listening? How are we choosing to act? How, am I choosing to say, hey, I have to be right? And then this last piece, am I really seeking the third truth? I mean, we have to entertain that there's more than what I'm just thinking. Um, all right. Trusting too much in the feeling of being on the correct side of anything can be dangerous, right? Which means I have to be open. We need to be curious. Um, Babies and little people are pretty curious, and I appreciate that. It's such a gift, right? When they start discovering their toes and their feet, um, we need to remain curious and not feel like we have the answer already. So, seeking the third truth. Am I open to other possibilities? Um, I want to be curious, but here's another way to think. Note when you are not curious. Like, what's going on? Is it a certain subject that I might not be curious about that maybe I feel like I already know? Um, Maybe it's this particular someone, right? There's a number of things that when we're not curious, I think it's a good indication to kind of stop and kind of review. Um, Interview your feelings, which I explained earlier, and then expand our data sources. We need more of that. Okay. Finally, this is your last quick moment. I'm not going to give a full minute because we're going to move in just a moment into questions and see if there's any that have generated in the Q&A. But, you know, when we think part of this is all about how do I take some of this? What is one thing that I can do to improve my ability to be open to other perspectives? So as you ponder that, and as we start to get ready for our very last set of questions, Talia is getting online to help us out.
I'm here. Hi, I don't want to jump in. Did you have something else to say about this slide?
No, this is just sort of the summary at the end. Again, my hope during this time, and like I said, most people probably have heard these things before, but it's the stuff that keeps occurring, right? Am I truly listening? Am I staying curious in how I'm using myself in this moment? Am I using it for good? Uh, and seeking that
Absolutely.
third truth. So yes, I'm going to stop sharing and give you a chance to
Thank you for everything, Wendy. That is awesome. And like you said, even if we had heard some of it before, you definitely broke it down in so many different ways for it to hit different and better, I will say, at least for me and some things. So thank you for that. We do have some great questions. One of them says, how does don't multitask intersect with someone with ADHD who needs to write down the points that the communicator is saying so you can recall those points when attempting to respond? This is especially challenging with a circular speaker who repeats points but differently each time. I find it difficult to keep track of the threads without taking notes.
thank you for that. I acknowledge and appreciate that every person knows what works for them. And in that moment, that particular human, that learner, needs to write things down. And that's not that multitasking that I'm offering about not doing. That is a strategy to stay present and to do all of that. So that's wonderful. In fact, I watched someone that I highly respect that I worked with. He knew, and it didn't have to do with someone maybe on the spectrum or the ADHD or need to write things down, but it was his personality style, and he was a very strong extrovert. And what I watched him do is he had a pad of paper with him almost always. And as someone was talking, I would watch him write a note down. And once he got that word down, then he tuned back into what they were saying. And I noticed that many times, and I thought, he's not interrupting the person with his question. And it was, to me, it was so much more respectful to use that support for him. And so the same thing with this person that just offered that, do what you need to do so that you can stay as present as possible. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's like self-awareness and them being intentional, right? About listening.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Is it possible to rebuild trust and strengthen a relationship if the other person isn't open to it?
Mm. In my research, um, I found that not really. So here's what contributes to that. That's sort of the short answer. Um, I still believe that there are things that you can do to help support it from your perspective up to a point, right? Um, and so in the work setting, you can still talk about, if you have work handoffs or certain kinds of things, you may not be able to repair trust at, in all dimensions, but there are some things that you can do. Um, but I also found that, again, that there were some that it just didn't affect, and there were many things that contributed to that. You know, people's ability, sometimes I'm ready to move on, but the other person isn't quite done in their space of processing or whatever might be happening in their world or their life. And it might not be the right time, but there are things that you can do yourself that helps you feel like you have done what you can and be as effective as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you. Another question, Whitney asks, have you done any of these trust building or listening exercises virtually? I'm finding this a challenging environment once relationships go bad.
Good question. Uh, Well, yes, I have, and it does affect it. So, for example, some of the mediation I am doing one-on-one, I have found that I kind of tested it. I've been testing it with people. For the most part, it's been okay. It hasn't been 100% ideal. When we're both in the same room and people can kind of be in each other's space and kind of reflect and kind of sit in that. Sometimes it's uneasiness, but sometimes it's in that uneasiness that they're able to articulate, here's why what is happening is affecting me so much. It's such a beautiful thing. Uh, but virtually, and there was a couple of teams that I worked with through the pandemic that didn't get to see each other at all. And we really did make some amazing strides in strengthening what was happening. And I have also seen where it has been a struggle. So it's sort of a yes and in what this person is asking. It's possible, yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm seeing a couple questions with this theme, so I will read this one, but it's also going to touch another. How do you interject yourself into the conversation with a group of people that are constantly talking over each other? Sometimes I just intently listen, but then I'm resentful that I can't contribute and also that they don't even ask my opinion. Other times I just interrupt to share my thoughts, but I hate talking over people. So, what do you do for folks that are constantly interrupting and not giving you space?
Great question. There is a gift for the group to understand how they are missing out on everybody's participation and engagement. So there's a couple of in the moment strategies, but then there's a pause about how do we design and ask that for a certain like certain agenda items to be facilitated differently so that people have a chance, right? So I would I've been there in the moment where you just kind of I, it feels unlike what we should be doing, raising your hand the whole time until people really notice you. All right. And just say, hey, and then I would just say, time out. Do you reckon? And the greatest gift you can give in that moment is you can give a little mirror up and say, I've been trying to say something for the last 2 to 3 minutes, and not one of you have paid attention. I'm curious about that. Right. That takes courage. And not everybody feels comfortable in doing that. But you can do some small interventions like that. I have seen where you can kind of tag team a couple of folks and maybe, someone over there and say, oh, yeah, I've noticed that Talia has been wanting to say something. So you might have somebody else do that. Okay. So one, you could do that in the moment. You can also go and have that conversation with perhaps the meeting leader or the boss and say, are you noticing this? Because it's affecting my ability. Um, and not everybody is a strong extrovert, but I would just say that the group needs to be more conscious about how they're treating each other. Now, then I would say, can we do some sort of facilitated piece? If it's a group that really needs to become more aware of how they're interrupting and talking over each other, then just grab something like a koosh ball. People talked about those talking sticks or a pen and say, okay, if you got the purple pen, right, then you've got the floor, and you don't, and put some boundaries around it. You don't get to be interrupted. Bring a little levity in and just say, hey, it's my turn. I get my 1 minute. And you find if there's some people hijacking the conversations, then you need more than just you. Somehow, how can you help? You might just say, this is really affecting, I think, how we're getting everybody's voice in the room. And the more voices we have, the better we are at problem solving. So, what can we do about this?
I love that idea. That's great. Thank you. I think we have time for another. Oh, this is a good one. How do you balance between not carrying over a judgment you have made about someone with keeping an open mind about them?
We are all, I would say every human being has this, right? And I work on this. So one of my best tools is a reframe tool. So I find something that's going to help me get unstuck. And so there's, uh, if I want to work with somebody or listen to somebody that I've struggled with, right? How can I reframe it in a way saying they're giving it the best they can, even though it would be done different the way I would? I might have said it differently, but but they didn't have enough time and they were shorter and more blunt. Sometimes it's reframing it so that it's more palatable to you. Then it allows you to kind of get unstuck. I'm doing that brain piece because that's what happens. You get emotional spikes when there's certain people or subjects that just kind of get under your skin. And the more I can be aware of that, and this you might tie into last year's presentation on the positive psychology. Yes, positive intelligence. There are particular things that you can activate to help yourself not get kind of hijacked by those saboteurs. So, but reframing is a great one. Talking it down, going, okay, I'm just not going to let that get under my skin today. Yeah.
Gosh, I can listen to you for hours. Thank you, Wendy. There's so many great questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get to all of them, but thank you all for putting those questions in there. And thank you, Wendy, for such an amazing presentation and taking the time to really answer those questions and give us some good nuggets to walk away with and good tools to practice. We just want to thank everyone for coming, and thank you also to our ASL interpreter, Kelly, and cart captioner, Jamie. Thank you, everyone, for joining all these sessions, and we hope to see you in the other sessions tomorrow. We're wrapping up this day with this session, and tomorrow is our last day. So visit results.wa.gov to sign up for some other sessions tomorrow. Revisit the sessions that you've watched and you want to catch again, or sessions you might have missed. You can also visit our site to download copies of presenter materials. And when that survey pops up, please fill that out. We really care about your input. We want to continually strive to be better, and take all of your valuable input into consideration as we do so. So thank you for that, and thank you all for attending, and we definitely hope to see you again tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thanks, Jane.